Sabrina 90s comic issue 1. It's confusing that Sabrina in the fourth wall-breaking start says this is the first issue, when it's clearly the second. And why is teenage hyphenated? And it's not like the one who wrote this was unaware of the previous issue, because it's recapped in the recap page. Although the recap lies to you that Sabrina gave her aunts the nice makeover. And if it was from Sabrina's point of view, when she said, "Magic book, take it away," it wouldn't be addressing Sabrina in the third person. I guess it's retconned and Sabrina did give her aunts a nice makeover now. Anyways, we start out with Sabrina yawning and saying at the high school library that ancient history can be so boring. In the sense that it's almost nothing but wars, she's right. But other than that, I remember finding history pretty interesting. I like her new hairstyle, she's drawn well. She thinks about doing a report on Cleopatra, thinking it would be interesting. Probably because she's a girl like her. And surprisingly, she's smiling when she thinks that she was quite power-hungry, continuing her anti-hero-ness from the previous issue. I doubt the story is going to tell us the historical fact that Cleopatra was actually ugly, based on all known portraits of her, and got by because of her personality. After all, this is a light-hearted kids' comic, so I doubt the writer did any research. Didn't want to confuse kids by showing them historically accurate stuff, and just went with what mainstream people know about, just like Jimmy Neutron. Then she sees Amy and wastes time saying hi to her, while thinking judgmentally, speaking of power-hungry. So first she approves of power-hungriness, but then she's judgmental of it. Probably because she has a grudge against this person personally. Amy brags that she'll wait until the last minute to study because she's gifted in that way. That's not really how the brain works though. I think you're better off studying and then sleeping so that your brain will be able to let the information sink in properly. I guess she said her intelligence was a curse sarcastically to mock Sabrina. I'm surprised at how creative it is that the mean girl Sabrina hates, who's a cheerleader, still subverts the cliche because she's actually a gifted A student anyways. She's not portrayed as an idiot. She is making a mistake by provoking Sabrina, but she doesn't know she's a witch. She notices what Sabrina is researching, and says that it figures Sabrina would pick someone to counteract her own blandness. I guess it's because Sabrina picked the obvious choice because she's a girl, so she picked a girl. Or she picked someone interesting, like Cleopatra, to counteract her own blandness. Too bad she can't explain that, since that'd be explaining the joke on us. I guess the reason she's going out of her way to antagonize Sabrina is that she's still scared of losing Brad to her. But Sabrina, after this personal insult, has more than enough of an excuse to humiliate her, because I was fully with her in researching Cleopatra, so that insult hit close to home. I like that Sabrina was at least trying to control her temper, thinking in order to control her temper to herself. So she actually knows that it's wrong to abuse her powers because it's basically bullying, using disproportionate retribution against petty insults. That's growing from last issue. But I guess she sees that as leveling the playing field after all of that mistreatment. She says that her hunky Brad is here to walk her home. First off, that's supposed to be Brad? I thought he was blonde. No wonder I didn't recognize him and wondered why she was getting a different boyfriend so soon. So apparently Brad dyed his hair. Well, I guess he made the right choice. Either that or this is a different guy who's also named Brad. Second, she says hunky, which makes me wonder if she's only into him because of the way he looks, because that's all anyone talks about with him. Sabrina wonders what Brad sees in her. Her appearance, obviously. Sabrina reasons that a little zap won't do too much harm, and she smirks in satisfaction at making Brad giggle. And oh, he's giggling on his own. It turns out that he's laughing because suddenly there's too much makeup on his girlfriend. And I guess part of the spell rewired his brain so that he wouldn't question how the hell makeup suddenly appeared on her face. Aside from the part below her eyelashes, I thought it looked pretty. Why would he laugh? I mean, that's his girlfriend. Since when do guys not want makeup on their girlfriends? He says that she looks like a cross between a celebrity almost red as Tina Fey and Cleopatra. Why does he say Cleopatra? That's not what she looks like at all, and why would he assume she even had makeup like that back then? I'm sure there was all natural makeup in ancient times though. I wonder if this forced reference to Cleopatra is just there to foreshadow Amy becoming like Cleopatra after this because of Sabrina. Amy was vain enough to keep a small handheld mirror with her, So she immediately discovered what happened to her and ran away frantically. Sabrina wishes she could use her magic to do a report. Well, how could you visualize that? You can only imagine what you actually consciously remember. She says that's against the rules. So, she's against that, but not humiliating someone she hates with magic. She's an interesting anti-hero. It'll be interesting to learn what exact kind of morality she has, because she's not pure good, even though she claims to be in favor of the rules here. I guess she knows it's against the rules because of a magic book, and it was made against the rules because of witches going to school. She recklessly thinks about conjuring up Cleopatra from the past. That's ridiculous because Cleopatra obviously wouldn't know English. So I guess she's only able to speak it because Sabrina was such a ditz that she assumed she would and magically gave her English as a result. Or she magically gave her English while knowing she wouldn't speak English normally. And also she magically rewrote her brain to not question that she knows English all of a sudden because she never considered that she'd react that way. So it's achievements in ignorance here. Obviously Cleopatra would speak an ancient language instead. And because she's from the past, for all Sabrina knows, she could carry a disease she has no immunity to. Or worse, Sabrina could infect her with a disease that her genetic code is adapted to and she doesn't have it because she's from the future. Which is what happened to the Native Americans. 90% of them. Because while it's not like all the colonials had smallpox, them just being on the continent still spread an epidemic anyways. Wouldn't you give Cleopatra some kind of disease, and then she'd give it accidentally to the people of ancient times? Actually, since Sabrina's a witch, and so she's closely related to immigrants from another realm entirely, she's lucky that witches like her have resistance to Earth illnesses. Maybe it's because she's half mortal, or if that's not the case in the comic, maybe she at least has a mortal relative. Maybe the Witches' Council uses a powerful spell to make sure every witch on Earth will have resistance to all the same illnesses as modern mortals, so they won't die of smallpox or something right away. They'd probably have to research what those illnesses and the resistance looks like, so they can imagine it. This isn't even mentioning the fact that Cleopatra, who convinced herself that the desert heat's making her hallucinate, not only doesn't look pretty like this at all, but I don't remember Cleopatra in real life being white. She's associated with Egypt. That's a pretty hot place. I remember that her profile on Ancient Coin has her with a noticeably big nose and face. But to be fair, I guess on Sabrina's version of Earth, history was a bit different in that respect. It's a world with witches. It doesn't have to be a completely accurate portrayal of Earth at that point. An even more obscure bit of historical artistic license here is that somehow an ancient person has the color blue on her clothes. That would never happen. I remember learning about the fact that a movie portrayed Cleopatra with a blue dress, and an article stated that that would be impossible back then. It took us forever to be able to make blue clothes. I guess her clothes were made by a witch. It's really ditzy of Sabrina to immediately tell Cleopatra the truth that she's a witch, summoning her to the year 1997. Logically, Cleopatra would freak out at that. Couldn't she have just let her believe that she was hallucinating? Also, there's a good reason that in the show, Sabrina isn't allowed to tell anyone she's a witch. But I guess the comic has just as good a point in doing it their way. No one would believe anyone who found out about witches, and spy witches could erase people's memories of any supernatural stuff. I'm sure they'd even erase any written or photographed records. They'd get rid of any videos too, and records of them. So really, there's no point trying to hide it anyways. I doubt Sabrina's smart enough to have thought of all that, and instead she's just being honest out of force of habit. Which is admirable a trait to have. Cleopatra has a really subdued reaction to being told she was summoned by a witch. Whoa, maybe her dress was made by a witch. Maybe she knew she was a witch. Also, she came from ancient times, where everyone believed in gods and stuff. So why treat mere witches like it's anything to freak out about? Well, they'd still be scared at seeing one. Cleopatra simply complains about how this is fashion evolved. Sabrina takes offense, but I just wish Cleopatra said what her problem was. Obviously, it'd be that rather than wearing a pretty dress like her, Sabrina's wearing pants, which women just started to wear like a century ago. Any modern woman would be seen as dressed like a man by someone in ancient times. She would point this out. Sabrina says she got this at the Gap, and she's asked what a gap is, instead of what's the gap, which is not how she'd talk. Sabrina says that it's a store, and Cleopatra doesn't know what a mall is either, of course. Sabrina says she's gotta make her look modern, which seems like a dumb waste of time at first since she summoned her for one purpose and you'd think she'd jump straight to that. But someone looks at her confusion, so she has a good point in contemporizing her look. But she didn't see that confused person. How long does she plan on keeping her around? It's just for a report. Cleopatra complains with her inferior look that these clothes feel cheap, not complaining about the fact that she's wearing such a short skirt. I can understand her insulting the clothes because she's used to her own wealthy fashion, which clearly looked a little better. Harvey greets Sabrina, and Sabrina explains away that Cleo's an exchange student from Egypt. Harvey doesn't even spend a single panel being surprised and questioning the fact that Cleo looks absolutely nothing like an Egyptian, or at least how we'd expect an Egyptian to look. There's not even a thought bubble if he's too polite to point it out, where you'd think, I guess her parents aren't native to Egypt. He could be refraining from commenting on it because she'd have gotten that remark a lot already. Egypt is known for being a hot desert. I can't imagine the writer didn't imagine Egypt that way when writing this. But maybe on Sabrina's Earth, Egypt really does have people looking like that. I don't know what Egypt is like on this planet. He then asks Sabrina if they're still on for the dance next week, and she says that she is. Why did he feel the need to ask that? So he actually got the courage to ask her again because he loves her that much? That kind of victory for him sounds like something we should have seen. I guess the comic doesn't care about that. I'm glad she said yes to him instead of just saying they're only friends. I can imagine it's because she really wanted to have a date for the dance and settled for the only one asking. Cleo likes the appearance of the men of the future, implying she might try to woo Harvey for herself. Beauty standards have changed a lot over time. I don't consider the Mona Lisa woman to look remotely attractive at all, but she was considered the beauty standard back then. Is it realistic for Cleopatra to think he's attractive? He doesn't have a beard, so wouldn't you see him as unmanly? But I'm thinking of colonial America, not ancient Egypt, I guess. Some people have different beauty standards than others. Also, I guess the reason Cleopatra probably won't die of smallpox or something from mere contact with Harvey later and radically change history, which is the kind of reason people shouldn't be allowed to summon past figures to the future. I guess the reason is that because Sabrina didn't think of that disease resistance consequence, she gave her the resistance just by virtue of warping her to the future. Did they even have high schools back in Cleopatra's time? Because she's not commenting on the fact that they're still educating people even in their adolescence. Or commenting on the fact that they're educating women. Maybe because she's a woman, she's immediately happy with that idea. But you'd think she'd clearly be celebrating then. She asked Harvey amusingly, "Would you like to feed me grapes and fan me for a while?" I love Harvey's flustered reaction. He definitely got that flirting attempt. Sabrina is miffed at it, but proves that she's better than Amy because she doesn't mistreat her for it. Good. We need really obvious indications of her being a better person than Amy. Harvey says that he has an after-school job and says maybe later, right in front of Sabrina. Sabrina's not in love with Harvey, she wants Brad, right? And yet she says they might be more than friends with a smile. So I guess it makes sense that she minds this. She wouldn't have cared last issue, right? Wait a minute, how did she even summon Cleopatra in the first place if she didn't know exactly what she looked like? I guess she did, and there was a perfect portrait of her from head to toe in the history book she was reading. So never mind. They should have explained that. I guess it makes sense that Sabrina isn't asking Cleopatra all about her life in ancient history, which was her whole mission in the first place, and Cleo should be asking her why she summoned her right away. Because Sabrina is not only flighty and easily distracted, but she's also primarily a people person. To the point where she got so used to interacting with her as another person, that she actually forgot what her intention with her was for a second, and wanted to spend time with her. It's sweet of her to want to hang out with her. Especially after she read that she was power hungry. She offers to go to the food court with her at the mall so she can introduce her to 20th century food. Naturally, she isn't ready for some of it because she's only used to her own kinds of food. So she's not ready for burritos, which Sabrina should have figured would be the case because they're spicy. She should have asked her on the way what kind of food she was used to eating. Maybe she did, but I would have loved to see that. This kind of story would be a great opportunity to educate the audience on Cleopatra, if only the writer would do the research. I bet if this was Rick and Morty, she would have actually looked the way she really did. Just one line about what she likes to eat wouldn't be too boring for the audience. She said she wasn't ready for burritos, and that frozen yogurt didn't help either. I guess she got an ice cream headache. She's never flushed the toilet before, but I guess it's so intuitive that she'd know what to do. She'll have a hard time adjusting to ancient toilet paper methods again. Going back to the past would be hard on her. She's already seen women walking around in the mall, implying that women are allowed to go out and shop instead of always being at home. I guess that's part of why Sabrina's aunts aren't happy with her. Maybe they looked through a crystal ball to psychically find out where exactly Sabrina was, and find out that this girl with her is Cleopatra. I don't buy that she would think CDs are wearable clothes, by the way. If she wasn't allowed to summon someone from the past, why wasn't that against the rules? Or maybe she didn't know it was against the rules, but then how was she able to cast the spell? I figured the reason she wasn't able to cast a love spell was because it was against the rules. Sabrina asks how she knows that's Cleopatra, but fuck the simple assumption. Instead she knows because Zelda babysat her a long time ago. First off, she's a woman. She wouldn't have been allowed any job back then. Well, maybe Sabrina's ancient Egypt was different. It's polite of Sabrina to say no offense after saying that she's really old. Second, what was she doing in Egypt? That place is hot as hell. She really loved to travel the world apparently, even in war-filled, racism-filled ancient times. I guess she used magic to look like a local, and brainwashed someone to let her babysit and pay her. Sabrina's told that she broke a witch code. How is she able to do that? Wouldn't time travel summoning spells like that be erased from witches by the Witches' Council then? Why wouldn't they do that? Wouldn't young witches be constantly changing history? Also, I guess Zelda has a perfect photographic memory and cared enough to do research on every single witch code if she knows the name of that code by heart, when its name is just an arbitrary series of letters and numbers, unrealistically having no proper subtitle. After Sabrina explains herself, Zelda's actually nice enough to let her research and talk to Cleo for a while, and tells her to send her back afterwards. She says that she'll give them 2 hours. I think that's being too generous. Why in the world is Zelda not staying with Sabrina to supervise her? Even Hilda knows that these things can have repercussions. Good thing the Witches' Council is such a bunch of understanding sweethearts that they aren't gonna punish Sabrina for breaking a witch code that a spy witch must have seen her do. Enchantress can spy on people. Maybe the explanation is that there's a first-time mercy law, protecting young witches from being punished for unintentionally breaking a witch code law for the first time. And she's young after all. Plus, it looks like there's a lot of witches' codes. How could anyone memorize them all? Also, her intentions were clearly good, or at least harmless, so of course she won't be punished too much. Cleo shows Sabrina to her room, and Cleo bows in honor of not the Brad Pitt poster, but Salem, because for once it's being educational. Egyptians worship cats, which was smart of them because cats ate mice that spread disease, so they should have taken good care of them. Sabrina tells Salem to leave because they've got work to do, when there's absolutely no reason he can't stay on the comfy bed. So I love that Cleo says that she treats him so shabbily. She says that Salem's just her pet, but that's exactly why she shouldn't do that. Sabrina didn't know Cleo had a cat fixation. It seems like she wasn't paying very much attention or didn't retain much information when she read about Cleopatra then. Then she writes down what she's told, with the story skipping ahead rather than boring some people with a long history lesson they could always just look up for themselves. That was a missed opportunity. She could have at least told us some of her backstory to develop her character for those who don't know. Bullshit alert, because after Cleo says she likes Harvey, Sabrina can't warp Cleo back to her own time. And the ants can't send her back in time either. Zelda asks Cleo if she wants to go back. Yeah, because apparently she has control over that now. And at least that's fascinatingly creative. I've never seen this idea before. But unless she's a witch, this is bullshit. Out of complete nowhere, Zelda reveals that the spell to send a historical figure back to her own time doesn't work if she doesn't want to go back, screwing over history in the process. Why would the other realm witches change the spell to be that way? I don't know why the hell they allow these spells to exist at all. Predictably, Cleo takes off before Sabrina can ask her who she thinks her boyfriend is with right now. At least the story was still enjoyable, so I can't say it was bad just because it was forced. Cleopatra thinks that the future world is an exciting new one for her to conquer, rather than an overwhelming one from being so different. The only chance she has of doing what she did before is if she somehow convinces the president to marry her, so she could start advising him. That's not gonna happen, but she's used to it working. It would be interesting to see how she would run at least one town she'd conquer, but that would never happen because that caused drama. Because Sabrina thought Cleo was fixated with the mole, she decides to check there. She'd be fixated with any part of the world because it'd be new to her. It makes sense of her to go back there because she knows the way, but even then, how would you have the way memorized the first time? Photographic memory? It makes just as much sense for her to go back to the high school. Meanwhile, Cleo commands the horseless chariot to halt as she jaywalks. Someone asks what's the matter with her for running out in front of traffic. I guess the bus driver was only acting mad because he's concerned about her well-being. He doesn't want to get in trouble for hitting her. She's acting crazy as far as they know. She calls him a peasant and tells him not to raise his voice to her. It's weird that she's acting this way now when she was nothing but nice to Sabrina. But maybe she just likes talking to fellow women more and jumps at the chance to treat men like peasants for a change. It's not like she's that much of a twist villain out of nowhere because she was stated to be power hungry. She demands him to take her to a mall, clearly talking as if she's very new to the concept of malls. I guess they're gonna assume she's an immigrant from a country without malls. The bus driver says that they're on their way there now, but it's gonna cost her $1.25 like everyone else. Cleo calls herself a queen, but out of nowhere, Amy pays the money for no reason. First, Amy keeps being portrayed as a jealous bitch, but now suddenly she's really charitable and helps a random stranger just because she can. Maybe she's only a bitch as she thinks you're gonna steal her boyfriend. This shows a new side to her. Cleopatra at least thanks her, and is smart enough to call herself Cleo after almost giving herself away. Amy says that she saw her hanging out with Sabrina today, and she thinks that Cleo is a nutjob, so at least she noticed she was acting strange. She thinks that she can fill her in on some of the mysterious goings-on surrounding Sabrina, so she offed her for a reason. Cleo says that Sabrina is her friend, and says that Sabrina says she's an exchange student from Egypt, implying that she's not to Amy. She's asked to arrange for her to attend school, but then she interrupts herself, and asks what the city museum is, as it's conveniently showing a Treasures of Egypt exhibit. She gets her hands on the wheel and demands the bus driver to stop the chariot immediately. She says that the images look familiar. Then she has to ask a stranger walking by to tell her what the banner says, because she can't read English. He's rude to her because she can't read it, when for all he knows, it's not her fault she's illiterate or a foreigner. She says that she's picking English up, but it'd be easier to understand if everyone used hieroglyphics. She's not even trying to hide that she's from Egypt. And I'm just wondering how in the world she speaks English just fine when she can't read it. So the writer thought about the fact that she probably shouldn't know English, but only applied it halfway because otherwise there couldn't be a story. Why not explain it then? I figure that she knows English because Sabrina didn't consider that she wouldn't when she summoned her, but I guess it makes sense that the same doesn't apply to her knowing how to read English because Sabrina knew about the existence of hieroglyphics, so she assumed she would only know how to read that. Anyways, I guess the man just brushes her off as insane. Because wouldn't even normal random people back in 1997 know that Egyptians read Arabic now, not hieroglyphics? Sabrina complains as she teleports to the mall that she zapped herself all around it and there's no sign of Cleopatra. And she says this right as she's appearing in front of a shopping woman. There's no consequences though, because I guess she was scared enough to pretend she never saw that. And she's gonna end up with her memory of that erased by a witch who saw it on camera. And all the mall security footage was erased by witches too. Instead, Amy shows up and asks Sabrina if she's shopping for a personality. But shouldn't she know that she has a personality, even if it's dumb blonde? So she should just be ready to call her that. I don't get why she calls her bland. That kind of joke would work against someone else. She's not even good at insulting people. She says that Cleo was on the bus with her. Sure was nice of Amy to pointlessly tell Sabrina where she last saw Cleo when she doesn't even like her. She tells her because she just wants to vent that her father is punishing her by taking away her car privileges, so she's reduced to public transit. I wish I knew why he was punishing her. That sounds like an interesting story by itself. But never mind, Sabrina's too focused on something else. Sabrina's told that Cleo went to the museum, which will probably convince her to go home from nostalgia. And I like the rhyme Sabrina said for a spell after she went through the door. She doesn't know how else to rhyme with museum. Sabrina asks why she didn't think of this sooner, and it turns out that Harvey's new after-school job is working as a museum guide. Huh, I'm impressed that we actually got to find out what his job was that fast. I didn't know they hired mere teenagers for that position. I just expect him to have a job at McDonald's. He didn't see Cleo because he just came on duty. There's a screeching sound from the Egyptian exhibit, which is just what she was afraid of. Then the story gets interrupted so we can see a short jokey story, where Sabrina feeds Salem cat food, and he complains that stuff really doesn't smell good. Wouldn't they specifically make cat food so it would smell good, so that pets would eat it? I'm really glad Salem is the proper color now. He says, "How many times have I told you guys I prefer the seafood buffet variety?" He says he can't stomach this putrid concoction anymore. It's weird that even after the first issue, the comic still hasn't told the audience why Salem is a talking cat. I remember that the comic has its own explanation for it. The story ends with Zelda saying that the only thing more annoying than a finicky cat is one that can talk. At least if your cat could talk, he'd be able to tell you what exactly he wants to eat. Was that really the punchline to make this padding worth it? I'm so glad I read it though, as he ends the story saying that he wouldn't feed the stuff to a dog. Now back to the main story. Cleo climbs in the display and cries, and says someone should get help because there's a body in the tomb. I'm just speechless. Now she's acting as if she's never seen anything related to Egypt before. She should already know this kind of thing happens. She says that it's her uncle. How in the world would she know who it is? Did she take off his base bandages? I guess she asked someone whose tomb it was ahead of time. Her uncle's name sounds like a parody, not a real name. And the only reason I say this is because it reminds me of a joke in Sweet Life of Zack and Cody where one of the troublemaking kids claimed to have a fake name. Prince Ramalama Shamalama Ding Dong. But then Cleo has the second at the end of it. So it's like it is a real name, and that's what that joke was based on. Harvey asks what's going on, and Sabrina zaps him apologizing and says that she's doing this for his own good. I guess in the sense that it'll prevent him from being scared of what he's going to see. This art doesn't make sure I know what she did. I guess she casually froze him in time. Cleo says that everything she's ever known has become something for people to stare at in museums. She'd be even more upset if she found out that modern Egypt is basically nothing like it was in her time, because the language and religion of before has been abandoned. She might think it was completely invaded by people from another country entirely, because barely anyone there still worships the Egyptian gods. She tells Cleo that if she doesn't get back to her own time soon, her civilization might not be as great as it was. Cleo decides that her place is back to her world. Sabrina says she's glad she's finally seeing things logically, without wasting time correcting her that she meant her time. And Cleo isn't offended, and is nice enough to want to say goodbye to Harvey. Lucky for her, Sabrina is nice enough to humor her instead of instantly teleporting her back home like I would do. Cleo makes her jealous by kissing Harvey's cheek, and he apparently smiles about it and then asks where they went. So he was unfrozen in time just for that. That was nice of Sabrina. Harvey says that he should have gotten an interesting job because this one has him imagining things. And surprisingly, Sabrina wasted a bit of my time warping Cleo to her aunts so they could send her back home. I guess that's smart of her because she's going to rely on someone better at her than magic. But it does make sense because Zelda already has personal experience with Cleopatra's time, so she would know how to imagine it better. Cleo's nice enough to bid Salem farewell first, and Sabrina asks how much time she can spend admiring a cat as Cleo's holding him. Salem says that Sabrina should take a lesson from royalty. I'm pleasantly surprised that Sabrina actually thought to make Cleo forget all of this. She brings her back home without all the 20th century things she knows about. That way she won't change history. That was smart of Sabrina. I didn't think the comic would do that. Also, museums have security cameras, so one of them would have caught Sabrina's magic. But I guess a spy witch got rid of the evidence. Out of complete and utter nowhere, Cleo says surprise, and Sabrina says, "My mirror! You're backfiring my spell!" So, she was holding a mirror. So Sabrina says that she's going back in time instead, and Salem is considerate enough to go with her because apparently it's his job to watch out for her, which would never happen in the show. I thought Cleo missed ancient Egypt, but I'm relieved to see more of Cleo in the modern world. I like that she complains because she did like that cat, and she wanted to kiss Harvey goodbye, so maybe he's why she wants to stay. She says there will be no more boring camel rides and sandstorms for her, and she looks forward to MTV and shopping sprees. I have a question. How does she expect to afford to pay for anything when obviously Sabrina's aunts wouldn't want her still around? Cleo doesn't have any money. She couldn't pay for MTV of her own. She should know this as an adult. I guess she plans on somehow getting a job and becoming wealthy with no resume or experience or modern education. She's not a threat. She'd just become a typical homeless woman. She'd hopefully agree to settle for any job she could get after reality sets in. She's not conquering anything. She wants to get the ants out of her hair and find a book of do-it-yourself magic spells. And she somehow is stupid enough to say that this might do nicely when she should know that she's not a witch. While this was a fun story, I think Cleopatra's legacy deserved better than to be represented as a harmless comedy villain. Oh sure, it tries to have drama with her, but she's not thinking ahead. The story ends with Sabrina being asked what she's doing here in the Queen's Chamber 2,000 years ago. And somehow the guard is speaking in English just fine, which is just nonsense. The same logic for why Cleo can't read English should apply to mean that her people don't speak English. And I hope he eventually asks her why she's wearing pants. Also, he's white too, despite this being ancient Egypt. You'd think he'd at least have a tan. This comic was definitely made in the 90s. Maybe Sabrina is subconsciously using her powers to translate anyone talking around her so that they're speaking the language she wants to hear. Because she expects to hear English out of habit, so her mind made it real. That's still a more plausible assumption than just accepting at face value that an ancient Egyptian knows modern English and speaks it, before even knowing Sabrina only understands it. Which wouldn't happen even if modern English existed side by side with the ancient Egyptian language back then. They read hieroglyphics, how would they speak English then? And the story will continue on to issue 2. At least I'm intrigued. I didn't expect a 10th story arc where anything could happen next. I thought it'd be episodic and end right there since it was such a silly story to begin with, and there were 2 points where it could have easily ended. It's cool if the comics have a little story arc so early on. Archie Sonic is way darker and it took forever to stop being purely episodic. By the way, why didn't a spy witch bring Sabrina back right away? If the Witches' Council on the show can instantly know Sabrina wants to tell a mortal she's a witch and lecture her about it, they should be seeing this. Well, to be fair, there's no mortals around where it happened, so I guess they figured having a spy witch staring at this part of the world was unnecessary. Cleo's a mortal, but she already knows about magic now, and she's from ancient Egypt, so she always sounds so crazy that no one would believe her about this anyways. And she's not in a position in life where she can easily get herself out there and influence people. Good thing she doesn't have access to the internet, and she wouldn't know how to use it even if she did. This story by Dan Parent was about Sabrina recklessly summoning Cleopatra to her so she could write a history report about her, rather than simply writing it based on the book she read at the school library, which would be just as effective for her. She must not have taken much in from that book if she was surprised that Cleopatra was so respectful of cats. I enjoyed this story, but it didn't make any sense. If supposedly witches aren't allowed to alter historical events on Earth, and this violates a witch code, then why wasn't the ability to summon historical figures magically enchanted away from all of the witches by now? Not to mention, I doubt Sabrina will ever be punished for doing this, which also isn't explained in the story. I'm starting to think witches don't actually care about messing with Earth's history in this comic, and just have it be written as against the rules for the appearances, because the rule isn't enforced in the slightest. Because Cleopatra likes the look of the men here, she wants to stay. And because Amy sees her on the bus and is nice enough to tell Sabrina where she went for no reason, Sabrina finds her at the Egyptian exhibit at a museum. Even though Cleopatra was clearly talking like she wanted to go home before, it turns out it was a gambit because she suddenly refuses to come back home and uses a mirror she had out of nowhere to send Sabrina back in time instead. Which somehow works instead of the beam of magic doing nothing to her because Sabrina should have been imagining Cleopatra back in time for the spell, not herself. So she's nostalgic for her home, but not enough to want to go back. Probably because she likes that women have rights here, but she's not mentioning that at all. Cleo's got an ambitious plan of conquering, but she's clearly not thinking ahead if she thinks it'll be achievable for someone who popped into this country without a social security number. If anything, she's a victim who needs help because she'll just end up homeless and jobless right away, realistically. She wants to get rid of Sabrina's aunt. But rather than simply running out of the house when she thinks she went home, she somehow thinks a magic book for witches can help her. A mere mortal. Unless she's not immortal, how does that make any sense? It was interesting to see Cleopatra react to modern Earth, which is why I liked this story enough to find it worth it. But everything about it was flimsy. She didn't look anything like the actual Cleopatra. And there's no explanation for why she can speak English when she can't read it and doesn't even question it. You have to come up with your own explanations a lot in this comic. It's most ridiculous when Sabrina sent back to ancient Egypt and even a guard from back then speaks English to her.